This video covers very old footage, 25 years old, of the build I did on my O-gauge layout. 25 years later, the footage is still interesting to look at. I hope you enjoy sharing it with me. Now, at the end of part 2, and this is part 3, of course, we finished up the lake, put the final layer of epoxy in. It has a little island in it. At some future time, we're going to make a boat rental place, and I'm going to make it from scratch, mold up a bunch of boats, make this a scenic beach area. But I wanted to get this part done, and I was working on this as like a step-by-step thing. But one of the things that allowed me to stay patient is every time I'd work on the layout for a while, now I could run some trains. And my friends were coming over on a regular basis to see progress and inspiring me to get it done, and gave me a lot of good ideas. But these run sessions at the end of every day, they really help me stay patient. Now, I built this, I call it a coal unloader. I named it the Mike Kajeski Coal Company. I wanted to give him a little credit. He made the table, of course, in part 1. And I wanted it to be similar, but not exactly the same as the Lionel accessory. It doesn't have to dump coal. I wasn't interested in that. I just wanted it to look a little realistic. Now, starting with, I went to a local place where they actually, like landscaping place, to see how they segregated out different grades of different stone. And I thought, oh, I can make these out of the foam I have left over, carve them up, put some white glue on top of them, and put various grades of coal. And this is what, in a landscaping yard by me, where they do sell different stones, they separate it this way, and then they come in with a backhoe. So I thought, that'd be a nice thing to add to the layout at this point in time. But I didn't want all the coal to be the same, so I carefully found out and took my time figuring it out that there are various thicknesses and grades of the coal. And that makes it, to me, just a little bit more realistic and in the final product. Now, because the train can back up and push the coal car up there, it's not a reality-based thing here, because I'm not trying to make a totally scale railroad. What I want to have is the look similar to the Lionel accessory, but I want it to be different. And I made it all out of wood and detailed it out on an ongoing basis, and then painted this whole area flat black, because ultimately there'll be a road leading into it, and I'll be adding various trucks and things, but working from the mountain out. And that was the key thing at this point, was I finished the top of the mountain. I couldn't realistically get any further back than this, and I worked my way from the back of the table. Remember, there's no access hatch in the middle of this table, so I was very careful that any place I'd have to get, I wanted to make sure there'd be a flat way I could get there without hurting the scenery. And my goal was to finish as much of the coal yard as I possibly could, and kind of look at it from every possible angle and think of how I wanted to change it, what I wanted to do differently. I tried to make it that everything in the coal yard I could pick up and move around. Nothing was permanently attached until I had all the vehicles and the trucks and the other things that I wanted in there in place. And I was really trying to detail it out way better than previous layouts that I've had, because I got impatient. Being honest, I got impatient. I wanted to finish it. And in this layout, because I planned on keeping this layout the rest of my life, I really was emphatic that I would get the details right. And the different grades of coal, every load is different. And it bothered me that when I'd see a coal train go by, they all had pretty much the same coal load. I wanted to see a different shape on each one of the piles, and it was just me. And right in the beginning here, one of the mistakes I made in the peninsula that goes into the dormer, and this is a 9-foot section that goes into the dormer. In the beginning, I had a vision of how I wanted it to play out, and even to this day, I look back and I was disappointed that I didn't plan it out a little bit better, because I had to rip it up and change it. And I changed it over the years several times. And I ultimately wound up ripping the whole thing out, filling in the whole dormer area and making a dropout. And we'll see that on the final video. And making a giant passenger station. And the passenger station when I was done with it, I said, why didn't I think of that? And this is the thing that happens with all of these layout construction things. Once you paint yourself into a corner, you've got to think it through and think of some way, rip it out, and do it over. And every time I detail out a little more of the layout, I was even inspired to just make it even better. And I went back several times. I wanted to see how this was going to look when I put some vehicles in it, even though this wasn't the final version. But every time I'd add a little detail, I just wanted to make it more and more detailed, and I kept seeing a super detailed layout when I was finished. Now, looking back at this old footage from 25, 26 years ago, it reminds me how complicated the control panel got. And it wasn't like the old days where you just put the ZW up on top of the layout or down on a little shelf. This got to be pretty complicated, and I'm so happy. Mike had convinced me to make all of the controls in like a little hidden panel here, so that when you're watching the trains run, you didn't see any controls, any wires, any switch machines, anything. The layout could be a lot more scale. But this part of it, and I made this little piece out of carbon fiber. I make carbon fiber parts for model airplanes all the time. This became a neat little thing that when people would visit the layout and they'd see how it looked like the inside of an airplane, I always thought this was one of the coolest things, and I have it powered by 2 ZWs. Now, another mistake that I made along the way, and I should have done this first, is we had to remove a giant closet that was built into the room. I wanted to open this area up, and of course Mike Kajeski had a plan, and this took about a week, if I remember right. We blocked off the layout and removed the whole closet so that we had this open area. I could make some shelves and a special little area to store things in. Since I had a lot of trains, I needed shelves to store extra trains. And Mike came up with a great design, and we put a nice new railing in. And this part of it, as I look back, and I'm glad I shot the footage, it reminded me how important it is in the beginning of a layout to clear the room and do all this stuff ahead of time. And it was on me. Now, I took the empty room, carpeted it. My good friend, late friend John DeTavio, helped me carpet the whole room. Even under the table is carpeted. I wanted to have a nice smooth surface to work off. But some of the times you get the horse ahead of the cart, and this was one of them. And so we built a closet in the room adjacent to this. This is exactly half of the attic of the house. And had I done this earlier, it would have been a lot easier. But again, that's one of the things people watching these videos and maybe picking up some ideas, well, that's one of them. Clear the room. And of course, I had some good companionship. My Baltimore Oriole was up in his cage checking me out. Now, Chicky had the run of the house. He flew around in the cellar and the shop, but I couldn't trust him up here because we had windows open from time to time. So, but he was a good companion during the time I made the layout. And we have all that storage, and ultimately I wound up making shelves for all my train collection. And in the end, a little storage area with the little sliding door and some area to store some of the spare trains, this worked out to be way better than I thought it would. But again, I should have done this before I had the table built. That was a hard lesson to learn. So one of the things that's very challenging about this layout, not only the shape of the room and where it is up 3 flights of stairs, the chimney going through the middle of the layout, and it kept me up nights how to deal with it. I originally had this idea. I made a little ramp. We covered the chimney with wood. That was Mike's idea. And I wanted to make a loading dock. But the loading dock, it looks real easy, like you would be able to do this in one stroke of a pen. I made several before it didn't make sense to have a loading dock that it just didn't fit what I had in my mind. So I changed it all to making this a giant factory with doors and windows and this loading dock that I made from balsa wood. And as I envisioned this, I wound up buying some kits that made windows, and I had to really take into account the clearances because the switches are right in front of the loading dock. So I really did a lot of thinking and a lot of making sure the clearance, and before I moved on, because if I didn't get the chimney right, the whole layout would be, I think, fake looking if I just left it like that. I had to come up with a way to put windows and doors and signs and things like that. And it took me a long time to figure out exactly what to do, but in the end, I think I got it right. So from this point on, my vision changed several times, and I had a lot of balsa wood from building model airplanes my whole life. I stripped down some balsa wood to make what looked like a factory would look, the thickness and the way it would be laid out, and I tried to sheet the whole side of one side of the chimney to see if I would like that would be a good way to deal with this chimney. Now, I didn't want to leave it the color of balsa wood, and I had to decide, do I want to stain the wood before I put it up or after? Well, I went back and forth, and I stripped the wood at various thicknesses, and no matter what I did, I was not happy with it, and I just kept going back and forth, and I said, you know what's going to happen? I spent all this time up to this point, and if I don't get this part of it right, I'm just going to be sorry for the rest of my life. So I kind of put, at this point in time, and I'm glad I shot this footage to remind me, I decided to put everything on hold on the layout until I finished up the chimney. I wanted to get this right. And I started I went and looked at a lot of model railroad magazines to see what a factory would truly look like. Again, I'm not trying to make a scale model. Anybody that builds an O-gauge layout knows all the scenery is compressed to a degree. So you really just can't make a scale building. But as I laid this out, it started to look more and more like what I wanted it to look like. I stained the loading dock, glued up with white glue all of the strips of wood, and then I had to decide, how high do I want to make this, and what do I do at the top of it? And the top is already painted blue like the sky, so it looks easy when it's done. All of these things look easy when they're done. But boy, as you go along doing them, and I wanted to have corners. Now, it just happens, and this is very funny. At the time I was doing this, Karen, my wife, was making a dollhouse kit. And all this wood that became usable on this, the corners and some of the ornamental woodwork came from dollhouse kits. And I said, wow, that really worked out great. Now, a lot of times you stumble on things like this, and when you stumble on them, it's just as good as if you were really smart and figured it out in the beginning. So I started to look at how I wanted this to look. And it's because this is a focal point of the layout. The trains are going to go by here. I need to have some kind of a little roof over the loading dock. And I made out of basswood, and I think some of this stuff came from a dollhouse supply, that some of the little ornamental things. But it was really, at this point in time, if you've ever done it, and I'm sure most of the people watching this video have a layout, and no, sometimes there's some part of it that you just makes you crazy. You can't get it right. And so looking at it from every possible angle, before I made the commitment to do this, I really wanted to get this right. And in the end, and I put the top on it like a little roof. I actually, on the final layout, there's people and an antenna up at the top. And I needed that roof to look like shingling material. Well, sandpaper became the material of choice. And I wanted it to be as realistic as possible, but again, making it totally scale, really on an O-gauge layout, that's very, very, unless you have a lot of room. And we are doing compressed scenery, of course, and I really had to I had to go to war with the army I had. And I think as I look back, I made a lot of the decisions that made this a really good part and a focal part of the layout. Now, I had a lot of my friends come over and give me advice. Arnie Haber gave me some ideas on doing this, and I used some rough sandpaper as the roofing material. Picked out a stain that looked pretty much realistic, and I wanted to start detailing out the coal yard because it's right next to the parking lot for the factory, and every time I kept adding detail. Again, your mind spins. I go to bed at night dreaming about what I wanted to do with this part of the layout. Now, everybody that ever builds an O-gauge layout knows how important it is to get the people right. And I had gone to a train show, and I said, I'm going to buy a couple of these sets of people. And I bought some that I had to paint myself, some that I had that were already painted. And I started looking around the layout. I just wanted to get little parts of it detailed a little more than I already had. And once I started putting the people in, it got to be like a little disease. I put people on the loading dock. I had people on the trains, people in the caboose. I put 100 people in the Seaboard passenger train. I just went crazy. Every chance I got, every train show I went to, I bought more people. And as it played out, I think it really added to the layout in a way that, as I look back, I was buying the little model cars, the little construction vehicles. Every time I'd add something, I'd be so happy that it just looked a little better. Some of the cars that are on the road driving all have a driver. Some have passengers. The workers all have some purpose, a shovel or something in their hand. And by the coal thing, he's loading and unloading, and there's people on the coal car. There's people in all of the engines. All of the cabooses have people on them. And there's a little hobo hanging out. And I just love this guy in particular. Always, every time I see him, I think how cool he is. But the one thing, that peninsula of the layout was making me crazy, and I had already done some scenicking back there, and I knew I was not going to be happy with it in the end. So I kind of just, at this point in time, put it on a back burner and kept detailing out the parts of the layout. And what was nice about this was, hey, the people in the caboose, some of the cabooses have people on both ends. What I was happy about was, now when I came up to run the trains, I had more breathing room. Now that closet was out of the way, and I had some shelves to put the extra trains, I came up with a name for the factory, K&W Industries. And by the way, that was one of the names that Karen had come up with. Notice the K is first instead of W and K. Now, it really taxed my imagination to try to figure out how I wanted to make this road. I wanted it to be level with the track, so I made it out of balsa wood, so a car could drive right over there without hitting a bump, and making sure I had clearance for the flanges on the wheels. It took a lot longer than I thought it would, but I knew when this is final detailed out, this was going to be another one of the focal points, because from this point in the layout, you can look all the way down into the peninsula, and you can see the tunnel that's on the right side of the layout. So the next thing is the lake. This is the second of the lakes that would be in here. Small lake. I wanted to make like a pond. At some point in time, put men fishing with fishing poles. I already had bought the people that were going to go in this scene. I wanted the roads to be up, even with the track, so you could just drive a car right over it without experiencing a bump. I wanted the parking lot in the factory to match the road like concrete. I ultimately airbrushed in all of the details that you would put on a road, but I wanted to rough it out and see just how I liked it. And in compressed scenery, did it look correct to me? And it did. And I liked the way it looked right from the beginning. So I moved on. And Sergio Zegras was a big help. We put a lot of the signaling in at this point in time, the cross bucks, a lot of the wiring for these. And I was at a train show and met a guy, and I don't remember his name. And he came to the house with a whole bunch of his stuff, and we looked at what was appropriate to put on the layout. I love the little cross bucks, and they all work off a little sensor that goes in between the rails. But again, every time I detailed something out, every time I went to a train show, I was just inspired more and more to get this right. And all the people along the loading dock, I had put the molded windows in. They were all molded from one casting, and little phone booths and accessories I had left over from other layouts. There was just no end to the fun I was having detailing the layout. And I look back at this year in particular that I did this. This was some of the most fun I had building a layout, because it wasn't really finished yet, and I was dreaming about it every day. And I laid out the windows in a semi-prototypical way. I looked at some factories and magazines and things that I thought would make it look realistic. And I think in the end, the one thing I always think of is, in compressed scenery, there's a certain look to compressed scenery. And when you get it right, it looks right. And when you get it wrong, and if you leave out one critical step, just leaving the windows off at a factory, or leaving the signage off, or leaving the people off, the whole thing starts to look less than when you take the extra time and do the detailing. And especially in my case, the detailing included cars. There's a model airplane in the back of that car. I made sure, ultimately, The Lionel accessory, I took and detailed it out. I put people in. I actually airbrushed it to a more realistic color ultimately. But I wanted things to start laying out, and I wanted to see how things were going to look from every angle of the layout. Now this layout, look at the lake when it was, I don't have the people in there yet or the boat, but that little pond. And I looked around and I said, yeah, at the side of our railroad tracks, there are always little ditches, little water areas like this, because the tracks are usually up on ballast. So normally a lake or a pond would be, or a ditch, would be right off the side of the track. So I thought that was kind of cool. And I did a couple of HO scale layouts in my lifetime, and I was overly concerned with making them perfectly scale. But in compressed scenery, this took a lot longer than I thought it was going to take in the beginning. But boy, when I was done, was I happy I spent the extra time. I even put a little antenna up on top of K&W Industries. There's a guy up there, a workman working on stuff. And when people come to see the layout, we have visitors to the layout, they look around, and all of a sudden they say, oh, look at this, oh, look at that detail. I don't know, that's true with all layouts. The trees took a long time to get right, and I went back and forth, a labor of love. So here's a little model plane in the back of a pickup truck, and I love all the little details. Now ultimately, we would be building a fly-in field with many model airplanes, literally hundreds of people, hundreds of little details. But I don't want to make these videos too long. That's why I'm chopping it up into parts. This is pretty much the end of part 3, and I just wanted to have a few minutes of running the trains on the final layout. I know people do enjoy that, and I did enjoy all this detailing. And at the end of many years of detailing this layout and many years of collecting trains and making trains in the world of model trains, making friends, this is the final layout, and I know people do enjoy watching the trains run. We're going to put some of that on the end of this footage, and I hope you do enjoy sharing this footage. So I hope you did enjoy the video running the trains. That train layout has been part of my life for over 25 years. I do enjoy railroading. I enjoy aviation. I enjoy model airplanes. It just seems like there's just not enough time to do everything in life. But there are 3,000 videos out on the channel you're watching now, Wendy Ertnowski or Wendy U. And of all the things out there, I guess the majority are motorcycling related things. If you have an interest in motorcycling, you might want to check out other videos. We just made a trip to France. Actually, we've done a lot of traveling. And guys, one and all, thank you so much for supporting the channel and for watching this video.